special as we take a look at the state of the nation. We are joined by hundreds of the Chicago community at the Southside YMCA in an effort to spark social change in our country. And the discussion continues with our next guest. We are so thrilled to have political analyst, professor of sociology at Georgetown, Michael Eric Dyson. Michael, thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you for having me.
Definitely a tough time in our country right now.
No doubt.
As we have been discussing. What are your thoughts on the social unrest going on around the nation?
Well, it's indicative of the extraordinary tensions that persist in a nation that has unresolved conflicts and ideas about race in America. The original sin of America is with us. The inability to overcome those barriers and obstacles that have been put in the place of people who seek to live a life free of those impediments. But it also suggests that everything is not equal. You know, we have discussions and conversations about the police on the one hand, whom we certainly appreciate and respect for the jobs that they do, and citizens on the other hand. But it's not an equal thing. When a police person shows up with a badge and a gun, he or she has the authority of the state behind him, the imprimatur of the state behind her to execute their will. And often the execution of their will as a judge and jury on the streets leads to chaos for Latino, African American, and other minority people. On the other hand, you have extraordinary tensions in communities generated from the kind of violence and crime that we see going on. Now, people, I think, have a misnomer. They call it black-on-black crime. It ain't black-on-black crime. People kill where they live. If you have an integrated community, you would have integrated killing. The reality is that 93% of people of color who die, black people in particular who die at the hands of black people. 84% of white people who die at the hands of white people. We don't have a narrative for white-on-white crime. So the point is, it's neighbor-to-neighbor carnage. What are those neighborhoods looking like? If they are depleted of the play that Isaiah Thomas spoke about, if they are depleted of the recreational outlets that people should have access to, if they have poor education, if the downward turn in the economy, the shift from manufacturing to service industries sends all of the resources out to the suburbs, and in the inner city, they are left depleted of any kind of buffer against that kind of economic devastation, then you have a recipe for chaos. That ain't no racial thing at that level. That's about the inequalities that prevail.
Now, you know how far you and I go back, and you know that I lean on you to educate me on a lot of different issues, and I certainly don't mind being educated right here on live television. But let me throw out, based on what you just explained,
right.
I need you to explain something to me. You say it's neighbor-to-neighbor carnage. We don't want to go by black-on-black crime. Fair enough. But when you hear that 316 killings have taken place, when you hear that African Americans account for 24% of those fatally shot and killed by police, despite being just 13% of the U.S. population, then you go to other things where we're doing things to ourselves, even though they exist in other communities, white-on-white crime, Latino-on-Latino crime, et cetera, et cetera. We get all of that. I keep bringing up the reality that we're playing a numbers game. That's why I wanted to do the show from here. Because when you think about what you've heard about Chicago and how you've got black folks really taking their own out, when you think about the numbers game and white folks making up about 66% of the population, the Latino community making up about 17% of the population, projected to double in populace by the year 2039, but the black population is hovering around 13 to 14%, and it's only projected to go up 15%. To me, we are in danger. So I look at it from a numbers perspective, and I say, even though your classification is absolutely accurate and indisputable, nevertheless, we got to bring it home and figure out how to address this problem and resolve it. What would you suggest?
Well, I go absolutely right. There's no question that, as witnessed by the people who are here, there is a serious concern with the devastation that goes on in our communities. You go to any church. One of the blackest men in Chicago is here, Father Flager, sitting up here in this situation right now. And the reality is, and I have preached at his church many times, and I look forward to coming back soon. And what's interesting is that he is on the front lines of trying to litigate in his congregation a brief and an argument against the devastation that we so easily embrace. But what he also is about, and what we should be about as well, is that there are people who are accomplices to that murder. You see black people murder and you go, oh, what you're doing. What are the accomplices? The accomplices are the social negligence. The accomplices are the refusal to acknowledge the humanity of human beings. The accomplices are, we're in Chicago. You know better than anybody else. tape after tape, recording after recording, Laquan McDonald and others, where police people without fear execute their will on the streets with unarmed young black people. And I'm saying to you that if you don't deal with the fact that the structural problems that prevail and the obstacles and impediments that are there are accomplices to people hurting and harming themselves. That's not about being black. That's about having lack of access to education and relief from suffering that people are confronted with.
You're right about that, but here's the question, Doc. Some would argue that black folks, as a nation of people, had it worse at one time. Those very things that you pointed to, the inequities, absence of civil rights, unemployment, education, etc. We were denied opportunities to pursue greatness. We were denied opportunities to educate ourselves. Throughout history, and somehow, some way, we appeared more together then than we do now. What does Dr. Michael Dyson say about that?
A couple of things. Appear is a critical word here. Social media puts a light on, puts a spotlight on things that already existed, but we didn't know. So when you're talking about the 30s and 40s and 50s, when you talk about A. Philip Randolph and the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, when you speak about Mary McLeod Bethune, there was devastation in black communities then. There's a kind of nostalgia that has prevailed to talk about a golden age of segregation when black people were to themselves and we controlled things. Now, it is true that when you were forced to go to Howard and not Harvard, when you were forced to go to a historically black college and university, there was a tremendous concentration of high intelligence and critical insight about the problems that prevailed. But once desegregation came along and black people were able to flee to suburbs and exurbs, able to leave the inner city core, able to leave the urban center, the devastation was concentrated upon those who were left behind. So it is absolutely true that black people were able to survive in the midst of white supremacy and social injustice and the racial terror that was unleashed. But the reality is now those people have been left behind without resources, and those of us who have made it, those of us who have television shows and those of us who teach at elite institutions of higher education do not often live in those communities. Though you saw the news report in the New York Times the other day that said even if you're black middle class, you're stuck in Milwaukee, they were talking about, still in those communities. So when you talk about that, it's not that black people are now worse off today than we were yesterday, but what happens is we begin to see the consequences of, as Martin Luther King Jr. said, the failure of our country. He said, look, Voting Rights Act was simple. Civil Rights Bill was simple. He said, let me tell you something now that's going to change the nation, and we'll charge it. To get rid of poverty and economic inequality. And so when you look at a point, when you talk about your man Mark Cuban, when Mark Cuban says, look, as that Broadway play said, everybody's a little racist, but it ain't equal. Mark Cuban is a billionaire looking at the fact that, yes, I may be scared of a white skinhead, but a white skinhead has not been the basis for laws being changed in America, having been historically lynched or castrated or murdered or denied opportunity. So hoodie wearing is not an equal distribution of stigma, because the very people who were born that stigma happen to be people of color who have not been acknowledged as human beings.
Furthermore, and I'm not saying this applies to Mark Cuban,
right?
But to many, the hoodie, that ain't a whole lot just to have a hoodie up versus a skinhead. But because of the original sin of this country that you mentioned and the persistent racism as a result of institutional racism, etc., black person can't take the hoodie off for everybody, because race is necessarily tied to class. So when Stephen A. brings up essentially personal responsibility, then quickly someone is going to bring up systemic problems, which obviously systemic problems are the driver of this, although I think it's legitimate to bring up personal responsibility.
Absolutely.
As far as that goes, it seems to me sometimes I'll be talking to a group of kids, how'd you get into TV? How do you do this? And my answer is basically education, in the sense that everything is, what we're doing here, if we talk about sports, if you talk about politics or religion or culture, those are software programs you're running. But Michael Eric Dyson has an incredibly powerful CPU that he developed through education and could run any software any program you like.
Bless you.
So as opposed to the kind of Booker T. Washington model of vocational school and systemic issues that involve the economy and where the manufacturing jobs are going, what about the emphasis on education so that you're able to deal in the world on a level where it doesn't matter what software program you run because you got the hardware.
No, that's a great point. Both of you make great points. But here's the problem with that, number one. Number one, Michael Eric Dyson is the product of people who struggled for the opportunity to prevail to allow me to become educated. That's number one. So I didn't get right, of course. So my education, a next door neighbor who gave me when her husband died, who happened to be a black Republican. I can never be completely against the black Republicans. She gave me a gift of the Harvard Classics. 14 years old. She was going to give them to a library, but she gave me 2 years before the mass. She gave me Ralph Waldo Emerson. She gave me Gray's Elegy in the Courtyard, full many a gem of flower born, blush to blush unseen and wasted sweetness on the desert air. I learned that poetry like I was listening to hip hop. I listened to Alfred Lord Tennyson, though much is taken, much abides. I listened to that because I had the opportunity. And my 5th grade teacher, Mrs. James, insisted that we study black history. So all I'm saying to you, there are many people who don't have the opportunity, number one. But number two, look at the statistics we're living in this society. Many African American and Latino and other people are qualified but don't get a shot. Personal responsibility is critical. If you go to any church, temple, synagogue, or mosque on Saturday, Friday, or Sunday, you will hear that gospel being preached. Don't tell me about the white man. Tell me what you're doing. Don't tell me about what your mama and them did. Tell me what you're doing. But at the same time, it's got to be bifocal, like I'm wearing right now. But they're smooth. You can't see them. You got to see both the long vision and you got to see up close. So the bifocal vision says, let's also create structures of opportunity so that Stephen A. Smiths, so that Miss Molly, so that Brother Max can prevail and allow themselves to take advantage of the opportunities that are there.
Real quickly, because we only got a little over a minute left for this segment. The role of athletes in everything that you're saying. We are a sports show.
Yeah.
This is ESPN too. Mm-hmm. When you think about the athletes, whether it was LeBron with Melo, with CP3 and D-Wade to open the ESPYs.
Right.
When you think about Rondo, who's going to be here, who's very active and actively involved in all of this, and so on and so forth. Derrick Rose, Joakim Noah before him here in Chicago. The role of athletes in this day and time, based on everything you crystallized, is what?
It's extremely important. Look, we've seen an evolution of the athlete. Jim Brown, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Muhammad Ali, but don't forget, Muhammad Ali was widely reviled. Speaking of excoriation, this man was run out of the country, so to speak, in terms of his patriotism. Only when he couldn't speak, then he was celebrated widely for his enormous humanitarianism. So people have to catch up to our athletes. Our athletes now have shifted from social conscience to social service. So Jim Brown didn't have NFL Cares. I'm not denying that program. It's extremely important. NBA Cares, my man Adam Silver, is extremely important. But social service, hammering a nail into a house or delivering groceries to a bereft family is critical, but it doesn't address why they're poor in the first place. It doesn't address why they need more groceries than their other neighbors. It doesn't address the systemic issues that prevail. And people like Hank Aaron, people like Jim Brown, people like Wilma Rudolph, Althea Gibson spoke directly to that. I am proud of LeBron and Melo and Dwayne Wade. I'm proud of this generation that has seen the necessity to rise up and speak, because guess what? Your opportunity rests on the backs primarily of a fan base that loves you, but also those African American, Latino, and other poor people who supported you when nobody knew your name and didn't seek your autograph. You make money off the backs of those who are your fans, who are themselves vulnerable to and victim of so many forms of violence, whether it's neighbor-to-neighbor carnage, whether it's the police people invading their spaces. And in that sense, athletes must have enough courage to speak up. You got enough dough, you got enough social currency. Use your mouth to stand up for the very people who made it possible for you to become who you are.
Michael, thank you so
social
much.
Media, ESPN social media, clip that. Social media just needs to clip that. That's beautiful.
Thank you so much. The Black President's out now if people want to check out your book.
Black Presidency, Barack Obama and the Politics of Race in America. Yes, ma'am.
You'll be back?
We so appreciate you. Yes, 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 yes. You will be back later in the show.
What the hell is happening? If you tilt your ear to the sky, you can hear it. The sound of a gun, louder than my voice, but the noise won't silence me. If I'm killed tomorrow, you will hear of my arrest record, but not how I loved Pokemon and read Kool-Aid, how my mother is proud of me though I graduated late. You were here every reason I deserved a bullet, but not why you should listen to me speak. Do you hear me now? Autopsies in Baton Rouge, Baltimore, Ferguson, Chicago, Milwaukee. The killings of police and by police should make everybody want to scream. These stats are not a game. Names being cremated into hashtags. How many more bodies have to pile up, badge or not, selling cigarettes or not, before we admit the system is broken? Do you hear me now? Silence is violence. Do you hear me now? Marching in the streets, our children need to be held and each other held accountable. How did we get here is the answer to where we need to go. But dialogue can only begin when we all speak up. If justice is what love looks like in public, then we must love harder than what we do, relinquish the privilege of a few, speak louder than we do, give more than what we do, sweat more than what we do, because this is not a single game we play. Equality is a team sport, and the only way to win is together.
Welcome back to the Southside YMCA for this First Take special here in Chicago, the state of the nation. And Dr. Michael Eric Dyson back with us from Georgetown University. Thank you so much for being here with us. But behind every murder statistic is somebody left with loss. And joining us now is Stephanie Brown, whose 13-year-old son, Darius, was killed in a gang crossfire while playing basketball. Darius had dreams of making it to the NBA. That was his passion. Stephanie is with us now. Thank you so much. We heard you speak last night. You did a tremendous job in just having the courage to share your story here with us. But tell us how you've been dealing with the loss of your son and the violence overall in this city.
It's been really hard, but at the same time, you just can't give up because it's just not me that lost Darius. He has other siblings and other friends, so you just have to keep moving. But it's definitely difficult, you know, to get over it when you're constantly hearing it day after day after day, and then just knowing that there's another mother, another family that's going to go through the same thing that you're going through.
In the throes of, first of all, I'm incredibly sorry for your loss.
Thank
My
you.
heart, and speaking on behalf of everybody on the show, our thoughts and prayers are always with you and your family. Let me ask you this. When you hear about the violence, knowing that your son was a victim of that, can you talk to me about the things that enter your mind in terms of what you're hearing out there and what you think needs to be said that hasn't been said about things that you find relatable to your experience?
Well, because this is not an isolated issue, it keeps happening over and over again. I don't think it's something that I can say that has not been said. There's been a lot of great points made today, just as was last night, over and over again, from many different levels, from religious leaders, you know, from parents, even our politicians. But the change has to come definitely from us as individuals, wanting to be a better person, wanting to be a better individual, wanting to see our children do better in life.
As someone, I lost a family member also, you're part of this terrible club. You know, when you lose a family member to violence, you're part of this terrible club, but in another way you get a certain kind of comfort in a weird way, at least from my personal experience, knowing that others have gone through something similar. But in your case, you're coming from a community where that's so prevalent. I'm just wondering how that shapes your experience.
Well, actually, at the time when Darius was murdered, it wasn't as prevalent. That was very shocking. But since he has been murdered, there has been children much younger than him being shot and killed. But I don't want everybody to think that Chicago is just this terrible place. We got a lot of beautiful children striving to do great things, my children included. You got children here. So that was just not the norm, but we have seen, we're 5 years into this now. Darius was murdered in 2011, and just as Stephen A. says, the statistics, they keep growing and growing and growing. So that does sadden me, but we still have to have hope.
Thank you so much. I'm glad you brought that up because I feel the need to say something, a couple of things here. First of all, we're not here in Chicago because there aren't a lot of great, loving, God-fearing people in Chicago. We're here because we know that they are.
Right.
And that it's being stolen from us by folks inside and outside of our community for one reason or another. And we need to pay attention to this and bring attention to this. And I'm going to piggyback off of what she said by saying that, but I'm also going to get back to you, Dr. Dyson, in this regard. Rajon Rondo just sat there. And one of the things that he brought up was education and not just showing up for one day and doing more. I want to know about solutions, and I want to talk about solutions, because when I think about education, Max, like you brought up, yes, the NBA cares, and we're not casting any aspersions on the NBA, NFL. We appreciate the efforts that they put forth. But when we talk about things that they could do more of, education's a big deal. What about sponsoring some charter schools? What about, I mean, if you've got the money, the billions of dollars that these leagues collect, and we're not talking Democrat, we're not talking Republican, we're not getting political here.
Right.
I'm saying with the money alone, combined with the conscience of professional athletes and what they're displaying today. Am I wrong, Dr. Dyson, in bringing up the fact that if you sponsored a couple of charter schools, I'm talking about each team, sponsoring a couple of charter schools in their respective cities, that's 30 NBA cities, that's 32 NFL cities. You're talking about the possibility of 60 in one league, another 64 in another league, over 100 plus charter schools that could exist throughout this nation, where we could help educate our young minds so they don't find themselves in a situation. How plausible is that in your mind? Is that something that should be broached and thought about?
No, I think it's a brilliant idea, and I would expand it beyond charter schools, because what happens is you end
charter,
up,
private,
right, but
public school system.
You end up cherry picking those you think should be saved and spared from the onslaught, as opposed to the broader children who are there. So I think there are existing schools that the NBA, the NFL, and other sports leagues can partner with here in this city, in Philadelphia, in Detroit, in Newark. Look, you're in a city where public schools have been closed.
Yeah, a ton of public schools have been closed in Chicago.
Huge numbers.
Especially Detroit as well.
Detroit as well, where I'm from. So here's the point. Those resources could be funneled directly into those schools, because we know teachers spend out of their pockets for materials and resources for these young children, number one. Number two, it would relieve the necessity some people have found of having police people stationed in these schools, as opposed to responsible adults who mentor these young people. Thirdly, you talk about challenging all of us to be responsible. Not only the NFL and the NBA and all of those sports
and Major League Baseball,
Major League
National
Baseball,
Hockey, all of them.
All of them, right? The puck is black.
That's right.
But the players are white, so it's already integrated. So what's interesting is that when you think about also parents and local organizations joining together to say, we will not take this on our watch, we will stand watch over our children, we will protect them, because nobody wants to excuse the lethargy, the inertia, but also the vicious assault upon vulnerable people here. Just because we speak about structural realities doesn't mean we don't have personal responsibility to resist those. And I think if we bring the resources of these big sports leagues together to target these schools with goodness, as opposed with badness, that would be the best kind of gang warfare in the most uplifting sense that we could think about.
And if people need someone to follow, right, in your community, the Jalen Rose Leadership Academy, he has started one and is doing great work in his community, and can follow suit with Jalen. Also joining us today is Father Michael Flagler, a priest at St. Sabina Church here in Chicago Southside. He's been a voice against the violence and bringing about change. Thank you so much for being here, Father. We so appreciate it. What do you think, Father, what do you think is at the heart of the violence we're seeing in these streets?
Well, I think it's real comprehensive. I think, first of all, yeah, personal responsibility is important. We got to deal with this self-inflicted genocide going on in our communities. We got to deal with rogue police that are killing. But I think we have to have the courage to deal with and face the inequality, Michael, that you keep talking about, that is real out here. When you have 9 or 10 of the communities where most violence happens in Chicago, you have double-digit unemployment, you have poor, underfunded, underperforming schools, you have most coming back from prison with a bus card and $20, you have most boarded up buildings, you have no economic development, and you have guns being poured in, and nobody seems to give a damn about those communities. We should wonder why there's not more violence. We have a tale of two cities in Chicago and across this nation. We've got got to equal the playing field and you can't help people value your community, value yourself. Well, you tell me every day my community is not valued, that I'm not valued. So how do you expect me to value myself when every day I walk around and look at a community that has been abandoned and neglected and tell me I'm a throwaway?
Well, again, I appreciate that, and there's certainly nothing that I disagree with about that. But I do think that it's important what I brought up before. You know, the black community historically has dealt with dire circumstances, and we've climbed up from the abyss and propelled ourselves to new heights. Yet somehow, some way in this day and age, it seems more problematic to do so than ever before. The reasons, again, I would leave to both of you to articulate, but I do think it's important to recognize that ancestors who came before us that would argue that the trials and tribulations were tougher for them than it is for us found a way to climb from the abyss. So if we're not doing so, and on top of it all, we're harming ourselves, then to me, that is a reality that we can't escape and we can't deal with. And when we talk about de-education, when we talk about charter schools and things of that nature, what I'm saying to you is this: the money is there, the opportunities are there for us to have these sports leagues and athletes and others, including ourselves, the media especially as well. We all can make a contribution in a very positive way.
But look at, no doubt about that, but look at this. Let's look at an earlier epoch and era in American society. Late 1800s, early 1900s, when you had Poles, Jews, Italians coming into the shtetl, into the ghettos of our major northern urban cities. And they had some of, and in Chicago as well, they had some of the same problems that African American and Latino face today. Were they demonized? No. Were they stigmatized? No. Harvard professors got together with social activists and social engineers to reconstitute and reconfigure those communities. They didn't say these people were evil. Now, Irish people had a trouble getting into education, as did Jews, but what happened is they didn't place the enormous stigma on the backs of those people. They used their social resources to change the society, and therefore the people could become better. Dorothy Day, the great Catholic social worker, said, I want to work toward a world where it's possible for people to behave decently. Decent behavior is not the product of mere individual will. It is also the accomplices that are good. The society that helps, the educational system that helps, the police system that helps. And as a result of that, you don't begin to A, demonize these people, B, throw them away. And what we're not dealing with is what Father Flager said. The message that so many of these communities get is that you are disposable, you are not worthy, you do not count. We see it on television, we hear it on radio, we hear it on the right-wing media. By God, we got a man running for president who has amplified the worst bigotry imaginable in the American scene for the last 50 years.
Yeah, but wait.
Well, hold on.
Okay.
So I'm saying, I'm saying that those same black people, you know what those black people did? They changed the laws. Martin Luther King Jr. and Ralph Abernathy and Ella Baker changed laws that prevented people from flourishing.
But I want to speak to that because I think you're absolutely right. There's nothing that you said that could even remotely be disputed. My problem is this. Again, I listen to Joe Madison some mornings. My man Joe Madison, your man Joe Madison,
no doubt.
Karen Hunter. But I also listen to right-wingers. I watch Hardball. I watch The Situation Room.
Gotcha.
I watch Fox. I listen to everything to try and educate myself to the best of my ability while reading, by the way. But having said all of that, let's be clear about something. When we talk about the abyss that people are climbing up from, all the things that you highlighted, we as a people historically have said the odds are stacked against us. Succeed anyway. The obstacles are there. Succeed anyway. When I give speeches, and I'm on the lecture circuit a lot, when I give speeches, and stay with me because I'm going to pause here, I always sit up there and say, racism doesn't exist. Pause. Obviously, I'm lying. Of course it exists. But it has always existed, and we have found a way to climb. So why is it that we're not doing that now?
We are, though, Stephen.
We're here in Chicago because people...
Those people did not produce the first black president of the United States of America, but we have. Those people did not produce the first attorney general who's black, but we have. Those people did not produce the first director of NASA who's black, but we have. Those people did not have an extraordinary concentration of talent at many schools in this, not only in this city, but in this nation. So what I'm saying to you, part of it is the focus. Part of it is to say that African-American people have done an extraordinary job job of not only climbing out of the abyss, but renaming it, using hip-hop culture, right? Using hip-hop culture to articulate their viewpoints. Those who were left behind, the wrong Negroes got the microphone, so that Snoop Dogg and Jay-Z says, and after all my teachers couldn't beat me and my mama couldn't beat me hard enough to match the pain of my pops not seeing me. He talked about the pain of father absence, but Tupac also said just the other day, I got lynched by some crooked cops, and to this day, them same cops on the beat getting major pay, but when I get my check, they taking tax out, so we paying the cops to knock the blacks out. That's progress. They named the abyss, they redefined the abyss, and they continue to succeed. Most black people are doing well in this country. The ones who are not, we have to speak to in a very serious fashion.
And Professor, in terms of your issue that you're raising, Stephen, if we're talking about the murder rate in particular, on the one hand, I very much appreciate the idea of internalized oppression, right, which we talk about, including some language that's been co-opted that always comes up when the idea of internalized oppression comes up. But maybe also, if black life is cheap, that can be internalized too in the community. Absolutely. But in terms of systemic problems and the murder rate, the fact is, since the 1960s, because so many guns have been produced and are on the streets, more people have died of gun violence in the United States since the 60s than every soldier, every American soldier in every war ever fought by this country, including the first and Second World Wars. That's the reality of the presence of guns. So if we're measuring progress in terms of the murder rate, I think that has a lot to do with the answer.
Let me also mention, we did invite the Chicago police to join us. They did decline, and
which is a bad thing and a mistake on their part.
Right.
Dr. Michael Eric Dyson, thank you so much for joining us and educating us.
As always, this is the kind of education I get over the phone.
Unbelievable.
All the time.
I also want to thank Stephanie Brown sharing your story. Our heart goes out to you. Thank you so much for being with us. Father Michael Flagler, God bless you, the work you do.
Go hear that man preach.
Thank you so much. I would love to. I can only imagine. After the break.